So I like to scroll through Pinterest, especially for encaustic pieces, just to get inspiration. And when I see a piece that I like, one of the things that I do is I try to experiment and see if I can recreate the techniques that they used. And this is one of those times. So I've seen a lot of pieces where I don't even know if I can really describe it, but it's very flat with almost kind of different levels, like different heights to the wax, but it's like a very sharp kind of transition from height to height, and I think they're using an iron when they do it, but I don't have an iron, so I was trying to see if I could recreate it using things that I do have, and so I thought maybe I could use fabric and fuse it through the fabric, and that would give it kind of that flat look, and we'll just see how it turns out. So this is me trying to kind of recreate that look. So I started with a piece that I'd already worked on. I'd stripped it down to just a couple layers of wax, and that's when I started using the fabric. And I learned a few things pretty quickly. One is that you need to give yourself kind of an inch of space over where you're trying to fuse it, which is not what I'm doing right here. I'm a little too close to the edge, and when you get to the edge of the fabric, you start to melt the wax on the other side of it that's not covered. So giving yourself kind of an inch of leeway prevents that from happening. And you really have to fuse through that fabric. And I'm doing it so that the wax is really melting into it, and that's kind of how I'm gauging whether I fused it well or not. And also, you have to wait for a little while before you peel it off. If you peel it off when it's too hot, all of the wax comes off with the fabric, and you don't want that to happen. So you have to wait. I found typically between 5 and 10 minutes before you peel off the fabric to get kind of the best result. The fabric I'm using is just a very plain muslin. So it's cotton, it's very thin. You can kind of see through it. It's not canvas or anything like that, and there's nothing on it. It's just the fabric. I wanted something that would be absorbent and thin, but also thick enough that it wasn't going to just sink down into the wax. So here you can see I've kind of learned to give myself a little leeway on the edges. And I'm really getting an interesting result. It wasn't exactly what I was kind of hoping for. The texture of the fabric really translates into the wax, which I should have been expecting, but there's always things that kind of surprise you when you do something that you've never done before. And when I saw it, it actually wasn't that surprising, but it was something that I wasn't thinking of when I started to do this technique. But it kind of turned out interesting, but it is something to be aware of, that the texture of the fabric you're using is going to stay in the wax. Now I'm trying to kind of do different levels as I'm progressing to the right of my piece here, just to kind of see if I can get those kind of harsh lines. And it didn't really work the way I wanted it to, but I did get some different levels, not from the progression so much as just from using the fabric. Just the way it kind of fuses underneath really kind of is what gives it different levels and different lines and textures and things. When I experiment like this, I really honestly have no idea where I'm going. I get kind of vague ideas of this might be interesting as I continue. And at this point, I was thinking, oh, maybe I can make this look kind of like a beach, like waves on the beach. You'll see at the end that is not how this piece ended up. But it is fun when you're experimenting. One of the fun things is that the piece kind of pulls you along rather than you pulling the piece along. And that is something that I really enjoy. I might get a different result if I try this technique again, but just with, instead of one piece of fabric that's the size of the piece, using small little chunks of fabric just on certain areas. I'm picturing that it will give me a different result, but I don't know. So I'll have to try it and see how it turns out. The edges were especially tricky. I had to go over them a few times sometimes to kind of refuse and to get the right texture so it was kind of coherent throughout. Now, because of the texture of the fabric, adding oil paint like this was tougher than usual because it is sinking into all those tiny little um, texture pieces, and it was really hard to kind of rub it into the surface. And it took a long time to wipe it off. But one of the things that I noticed is that I didn't get streaks like I normally do when I have a smooth surface. And so taking the oil paint off wasn't as much of a burden because I didn't have to worry about the streaks. Now this was another experiment I wanted to try, using a little linseed oil to kind of water down my oil paint to see, I'm trying to get some drips, and it didn't end up working the way I wanted it to, but it was kind of interesting to try nonetheless. Now here I'm not really liking the result, so I'm trying something different. But I kind of like the color, so I'm leaving the color, and I'm just going to try to put something over the top. Um, and I decided to do a little bit more brown, but then later on I'm going to actually add some wax and kind of combine the oil paint color with some white wax. And you can see that the waves on the beach is gone at this point. It's so funny to see myself try different things because when I'm editing a video, I know it works. I know what I end up with. And to see myself kind of do these things, to try these things that didn't end up working is kind of interesting and a little frustrating at the same time. But that's experimentation, you know. You got to try things before you know what you're going to like and what's going to work well. Now, when you're adding things over oil paint, you want to do it while it's still wet so that the wax has a chance to encapsulate the oil paint. So I'm really trying to make sure that the wax is the right temperature before I peel things off. And you see I still have hints of all the colors that I've added, the blue wax, the green oil paint, the brown oil paint. But it's kind of I'm trying to blend it so it looks more cohesive, because right now, instead of the beach, the waves on the beach, I'm trying to go for more of like an earthy tone to this piece. Now this technique has been really interesting, and I'll show you some close-up pictures in a minute, but I wanted to add, I'm adding an element here, and it's a tree. I'm drawing a tree in with my awl and a few wires to kind of give it some texture, some barky kind of texture. And that's just to kind of bring this whole piece together and complete this earthy motif. Now I've cut this part down because you can't really see what I'm doing exactly because I'm not using color or anything, I'm just carving into the wax. But I'll be adding oil paint into the lines here in a second, so you'll be able to see exactly what I've been drawing. Now I'm not worrying too much about staying in the lines because it's oil paint. I'm filling the lines and I'm gonna wipe it away, the excess. Sometimes I think the hard thing about experimenting like this is, my main goal is to try different techniques and to see how they work and to get ideas for pieces in the future, but I still want to make my experiments into finished pieces that I can be proud of. And that's sometimes difficult when I'm just experimenting with new techniques. But I think I really hit a home run on this one. I wasn't sure for a while that it was going to end up being a solid piece, but sometimes you just have to keep going until something stands out and you get a solid idea for how to finish up your pieces. This is a little India ink. I'm just adding a little extra color to this tree. I'm kind of darkening it, but then I'm going to add a little green and red and yellow for the leaves. And this is it. This is how this piece ended up, and I have to say I'm pretty pleased with this technique. I think it's really fun and interesting. Thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.